Well, Kenya has prided itself on being one of the most professional armies here in Kenya. I mean, here in the region. However, the claim of professionalism of late has come under in for some scrutiny. We remember what happened at Westgate, which raised questions about the conduct of the troops. You know, same thing we saw at the Great University. In this case, if the details coming out of Adde are true, then it points to a real big failure in both leadership, in ability to utilize intelligence, given that they knew that this attack was going to happen and were seemingly unable to respond to it. And the fact that you've got troops essentially kicked out of their own camp, you know, running into the bush and stuff, really bespeaks a failure, you know, of epic proportions. So I do think the claim of professionalism takes a huge dent from this. Well, we have seen in the last 7 months at least three attacks on AMISOM bases, and these are forward operating bases, so they're essentially in remote areas. But all these attacks happen immediately after rotation, and this is essentially because the rotations are carried out in they tend to replace one battalion for another, one unit for another, without any time for handover and stuff. Now, this is a result of a limitation that AMISOM has. I mean, it's got 22,000 troops at the moment. If you think about the UNISOM operation in 1993 to 95, it had 30,000 troops, and with a almost exact mandate that AMISOM has. So AMISOM is under-equipped. And this leads to a situation where troops tend to overstay on their tours of duty. And also because they're very reliant on the UN to provide the facilities to transport their troops in and out of theater. It means the planes will bring in one unit, and the same plane will go out with the unit it's replacing. You know, so there is a big problem of capacity within AMISOM that would so it would then be allowed to actually stay. I mean, be able to carry out rotations on its own terms. At the moment, the most pressing objective for AMISOM should be to consolidate the gains it's had. We've seen since 2011, with a slight break in mid 2013, so almost non-stop expansion of AMISOM across Somalia. This has meant that its resources are stretched. We also got to remember that AMISOM doesn't have lots of equipment. For example, it doesn't have helicopters. You know, so moving troops around, reinforcing bases is a problem. It's got to consolidate that, and that might mean getting out of some of these outer bases that are being overrun, then actually hold ground that it can protect. The second thing is the AMISOM needs to be reinforced itself. It needs to be given the tools to do the job the international community is asking of it. So it needs to get its helicopters. The UN has already authorized AMISOM to have 12. It doesn't have any because the two contributing countries are supposed to come up with these assets. The model for deployment for AMISOM is that the countries deploy with the equipment, and then they are refunded. The equipment is essentially leased off them by the UN. Well, nobody has come up with helicopters, so it's quite urgent that AMISOM is reinforced, and also not reinforced just with equipment, but also with troop numbers. There was an assumption when AMISOM deployed that it would have it would be able to stand up the Somali National Security Forces. And that this would take up the slack for the fewer troop numbers that AMISOM has. This has not happened. So it's time we actually acknowledge that this is the facts on the ground.